Illuman. Men helping other men to become better, more authentic men. Please visit our website at illuman.org.
I keep seeing him. Some green man. Some guide ahead who knows this wild earth far better than me. He glides light-footed along the steep slopes where I blunder through. The animals eye me puzzlingly where they nuzzle to him and point their snouts toward nearby water and warm bedding. The me of men and urbanity is a fool following this master of the wilds. His lips are often curled in a sly smile, and his eyes carry the beam of moonset magic. I'd go with him anywhere. I'd go with him anywhere just to see, just to hear how he speaks to trees and behold him fall to his knees at every fresh flowing fountain. He says the mountain birthed him and will claim him again one day. All things go home at last. To me, he seems sturdy as an old boulder. And the way he tells it, his body has been broken and pieced together many times. He cares not for our diagnoses of the great mother's maladies and wants only to wander the earth, come what may. He is the one I go to sit with by firelight to hear his strange myths and riddling verses that spin me every which way. His recounts are unblemished by the city mind and often reduced to just growls and snarls that lull me to the deeps. Now he sat for years with an old woman who made medicine from plants and read the dreamings of the stars. She forebode it would become like this one day. Brutal storms and ferocious wildfires and a sense we'd lost our way. But the storytellers of her girlhood spoke of humanity's underground past and of sea-bound ages, insisting we still have plenty of animal in us. I know where I'll go when the walls begin to crumble. To the mountain. To clasp hands with my green, wild man who knows the shape of nothingness and will, without delay, kneel down and begin to scratch the marks of a new plan into the dirt. The old woman forebode it would become like this one day, brothers, brutal storms and ferocious wildfires and a sense we've lost our way. When the walls of this society begin to crumble, let's go to the mountain and clasp hands with our green man who knows and does not fear the shape of nothingness. And when it crumbles, without delay, we'll kneel down and begin to scratch the marks of a new plan into the dirt.
Draw in closer, brothers. Hold the fire in your belly. This is a story that has been handed down to us. It's all here, brothers. We've been given the story, and now we're going to give it to you, and we're wondering what in the hell you're going to do with it. You'll have to help us out. There's going to come a point as I begin this first part of the story where you'll hear the boy. And whenever you hear the boy, I need you to all shout out, "You can do it!" The boy. You can do it! All right, you're working on it. It's not good, but you'll get it. There was once upon a time. Not a time like this. It was a time before time, when stories like this were still being told and believed. So in this time, there was a king. He lived in a castle at the center of his kingdom. But at the very edge, way out on the edge of this kingdom, was a deep and enormous forest with wild animals of all sorts. All right, then.
We've got some live ones here.
A few beasts. A few beasts.
We're surrounded by
have they been
wild.
fed? That's all I want to know.
Not enough.
We need to know something about kings, brothers. They get hungry.
Yeah.
And one day he dispatched his best hunter into those wild woods out there on the very edge of his kingdom to take a deer. He was hungry. Little wild venison. That hunter was never seen again.
Crying shame.
After a long time, a short time, or even a longer time, the king realized his best and finest huntsman was not going to return. Something went wrong out there, the king said. And the next day he sent 2 more hunters out to search for his finest huntsman. But none of these hunters were ever seen again. On a third day, worry was moving through the whole castle, and the king called all the rest of his huntsmen together. You can probably see them right now, brothers. Right in front of you, the steam rising off their shoulders, their weapons clean and ready. You can see the ambition in their eyes to please the king. And he told them, "Scour the entire forest and stay at it until you find these three, my best hunters, and bring them home." And one by one, all these beautiful, shining boys went off into the deep woods.
You can do it.
That's not really the boy, but that's close. None of them were ever seen again.
I'm sensing a theme here.
Not one of those hunters ever returned, not even the pack of dogs that went out with them. And after that, brothers, fear was king. And no one dared to enter that forest out there on the edge of the kingdom, that deep in solitude and place of stillness. The old stories say that only now and then an eagle or a hawk would fly over that forest. So time passes like a flying arrow with this situation going on and on and on for years. No one going into that forest. They didn't even think about it. Until one day, a stranger, a young hunter appeared who wanted to do some work.
Who was it?
Well, he didn't talk to the guard at the gate.
He did.
No. He didn't talk to the servant at the castle door. He went straight to the king and uttered the immortal words. "Is there any trouble a young man can get into around here?
It was a logical question for a young man. Yeah. I've got a bad feeling about this.
The king said, yeah, we got some trouble. We got some trouble. And he told him about the dark wood, the missing hunters, and the dogs. But this strange hunter, after hearing all of this, offered to go into the mysterious and dangerous woods. The king, however, must have been feeling extra compassionate. Maybe he noticed the pink in the cheek of this young hunter. He said, it's not safe in there. I really don't think you should go in there, because I have a feeling that like all the rest of these huntsmen that I've sent there, you won't return. We'll never see you again.
He took that advice, didn't he?
Not hardly.
No, I didn't think so. Oh.
The hunter replied, sir, I'm well aware of the risk, and fear is something I have no relationship with. So the hunter took his dog and he walked into that forest.
Wow. He's either brave or quite crazy in the head a bit, eh? Yeah, no doubt.
The return rate is not good.
No.
Well, watch what happens. The dog ran ahead of the hunter, and it wasn't long before he picked up the scent of game and went in pursuit, but he had hardly run 3 steps before he stood at the edge of a deep pool and could not go any farther. Just then, a great, naked, rusty red arm, reached out of the water and grabbed hold of the dog and dragged him down. The dog disappeared.
Crying shame. The dog.
I wonder what grief that called up into that hunter.
Yeah.
What did the hunter say to himself when all this happened?
I can do it. Yeah.
No, he didn't say that.
Not that.
He said, this must be the place. And he didn't take another step toward that lake.
That's a sign of intelligence.
Yeah.
Finally.
Something happening good here. So the hunter went back to the castle, and he gathered 3 of the king's finest men, and he came back to the pond, and he looked deep into its waters. And he said, there's something down there. And they started the slow, unglamorous work of bucketing out the water from the pond. No one really knows how long it took to bucket out that whole pond.
Maybe several years even.
15,
Takes
20?
a long time to bucket out a pond.
For some of us,
Yes.
a long time. At any rate, they got it emptied. They weren't that passive. When they got down to the ground, they saw a wild man lying there whose body was as brown as rusty iron. His hair, I like this part, his hair hung down from his head over his face and all the way down to his knees.
This was a wild man.
So you know what they did to that wild man? They caught him. They caught him and they bound him with heavy ropes, and they dragged him back to the king's castle.
What's going on with this pool here?
It's deep
It's deep.
and cold too.
It could be a symbol of the unconscious.
Well, what's the guy doing out at the bottom?
Yeah. Sometimes we bury the wild man deep. Deep underwater.
Well, at this castle, people couldn't believe what they were seeing, brothers. This rusty, hairy man, this wild man, who somehow, some way allowed himself to come up from the deep place, to be caught, this lord of the deep waters, and to be brought out into this brightly lit castle. What to do with him? What to do with him now that you've caught him? What to do with him? The king had an idea. Here's my idea. We'll put him in the center of the courtyard. We can sell tickets, maybe 10 cents. See the wild man. So they did it. They took the wild man and had him locked up in an iron cage and placed in the middle of the courtyard so everyone could look at the wild man. And the king forbid anyone on pain of death to open this locked door. You don't want to let the wild man out. No. The king took the key then, and guess what? He gave it to the queen for safekeeping. Yeah. We know the woman was going to come in here. So once that happened, the forest became tame, and people went in and out. You know, maybe a concrete path, little flowers.
RV park soon to come.
Yeah. McDonald's. Well, it just so happened that central courtyard of the kingdom, where they placed that wild man in that cage, happened to be the favorite playground for the king's 8-year-old son. And one day he was playing in that courtyard, and his favorite golden ball that he was playing with got away from him and rolled down into that cage. The boy ran over to the cage. Please. They were good.
They were ready that time.
Yeah, I tried to sneak it right by, but they're not all as dumb as they look. It says that right here. I'm just reading it. He ran over to the cage. He said, please, sir, give me my golden ball back. The wild man said, what did you call me? He shook his head and said, not until you've opened the cage for me. And the boy was afraid. He was afraid. I can't do it, he said. The king won't let me. And he ran away. He ran away. Can you imagine being 8 years old and all of a sudden all you'd ever seen was neatly clipped and tucked and nothing out of place, and suddenly here's a naked, hairy wild man in a cage with the deepest eyes you've ever looked into. And he's got your golden ball and he won't give it back. All night long he thought about that ball. It was all he could think about. The story says that the next day the boy returned and asked for his...
You can do it, boy.
Asked for his ball again. Now, you know in the great stories when they say a day and a night, it's not 24 hours. It's always representing some mysterious length of time. So a day and night had passed. It's probably a long while, and maybe next time when he asks, his voice is cracking. Strong Adam's apple maybe poking out.
Hair on the chin.
Other things poking out.
You said it.
Woo! Voice dropping. And so maybe the boy says, I need that ball.
Do it.
The wild man responds, all you have to do is open the cage. But the boy was afraid.
You can do it.
But he can't get that ball off his mind, brothers. So on the third day, while the king was out hunting, the boy,
you can do it,
came once again to the wild man. He said, even if I wanted to, I couldn't open this cage door because I don't have the key. Well, we knew that when the story started, didn't we?
Yeah.
Well, the wild man says, I can help you out with that. The key is under your mother's pillow.
Oh.
Freud was right.
That says something. This inner bedroom.
The inner bedroom.
Yes.
The love chamber.
That's right. Where she dreams of her little boy growing to be a man. Becoming
maybe he could be king one day.
Yes. Who knows? Keep him nice. Yeah. Keep him nice.
If not king, a doctor or a lawyer.
Yes.
You know.
Definitely not a poet.
Not a poet. They don't make any money. No. Have you seen that guy walking around? He can't even get a haircut.
Look who's talking. Oh, God.
Where was I? We're not on the story anymore.
No. We got a key we got to find.
Oh, the key.
You have to take the key.
Yeah.
The wild man said, you got to steal it out from under your mother's pillow. Well, you know, something happened this time. Because when the wild man told him that he was going to have to open this cage, this time, as if the constellations of stars was just perfect, this time the boy threw his fear to the wind and took the lonely steps up to his mother's bedroom. He opened the door and went over to her bed and lifting the pillow, and just as the rusty man had said, there was a key, and he slipped his hand in and took it. And he ran back down out into the courtyard to the wild man. But listen, listen, brothers. That cage door isn't easy to open. No. And while the boy was fumbling around...
He got a key. Does he really have a key, though?
Does he have a key?
He has a key.
Can you show it to us?
Well, so it's something like this.
Oh.
Yeah, this is my key. Yeah, I took
kind
it.
Of a skeleton key.
You knew I took my key.
Is that how they make keys in Texas?
Well, it's a... What do you mean?
Well, I got one from Washington here.
This is what they're like on the East Coast. Check out that key.
Yeah. Well, damn.
All right, back to the story.
So you boys are into measuring things. I tell you, those ain't keys. You little peckers. This is a key.
Who was that wild man?
I don't know. But his mom's got a big pillow, I'll tell you that.
Man, oh man. Well, so that boy, he got down to that cage, and that cage door is not easy to open. And the story says he pinched his finger hard while he was trying to open that between the bars. It's going to leave a mark.
Yeah, it's going to bleed.
Yeah. But all the same, a little blood, a little pain, and he got that cage door open. And the wild man, he walked right through it. And he gave the boy the golden ball.
Yeah.
He stretched and he growled. And he walked off. The boy suddenly, he was terribly afraid because he was thinking about what was going to happen to him when his mom and dad, the king and queen, got home from this hunting trip. And he screamed out, "Wild man, if you go away, it won't be good for me." The wild man wheeled around. He said, "You did something good for me. I'll do something good for you. Come with me. Come with me.
Yeah.
Are you wild?
Climb on my shoulders. Come with me." We should all be so lucky.
Yeah. Oh.
And the boy riding on the broad shoulders of the wild man left the castle and went with the wild man, never to be seen again by his father and mother. When the king returned, he noticed the empty cage right away. He inquired of the king, "How is it that the wild man is loose?" She didn't know anything about it. She immediately went up to her room and checked under the pillow. Nothing there. She went outside calling desperately for the boy. No answer. The king sent a search party out into the fields, but they didn't find the boy. It wasn't difficult to guess what had happened.
No.
And the whole kingdom moved into a time of deep mourning.
Yeah.
Hope.
All of them?
Oh, well, there was one old wise man that carried around a big-ass key.
Really old.
Yeah, he's been around the block once or twice or 100 times.
Yeah.
He was delighted.
Yeah.
He was delighted.
Brothers, do you know what it's like in your life to pass from one door into another? To have one door close and another open?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's continue with the story. When the wild man had reached the dark forest once more, he took the boy down from his shoulder. I forgot they were going to do that.
Yeah, they're going to do it. They got it down. They got it down.
Let's try that again. He took the boy from his shoulders and he put him down on the green earth. And he said, "Boy, you will never see your mother and father again." This was a big deal. It was like that wild man said to him, "Boy, it's time for you to grow up. It's time for you to become a man." And you know what he did next? He made a soft bed in the earth for that boy to lay down in. Yeah. He made a soft place for that boy to lay down.
You ever sleep on a bed of moss, Jim?
I have. I have done it.
Yeah.
There's nothing like it.
Mm-hmm. Stars.
What a lovely thing it is for the wild man to do for that boy. He made a soft bed where he could lie down and sleep through the night. And as he lied down, he remembered the words from that wild man that he must leave his home. And the wild man told him, "I will keep you with me, for you have set me free," the wild man said, "and I feel compassion for you. If you'll do everything I tell you, all will go well." That's a little foreboding, isn't it? Mm-hmm. If you do everything I tell you, all will go well. "For I have much gold and treasure, more than anyone else in the whole world." Well, the boy slept through the night, and he dreamed beautiful dreams. Mm-hmm. The next day, he woke fully refreshed. The wild man took him to a spring. He took him to a spring that was nearby. "Do you see this golden spring?" the wild man said. "It is clear as crystal and full of light. I want you to sit beside it and make sure that nothing falls into it. Because if that happens, it'll wrong the spring. And that mustn't take place," the wild man said. Now, brothers, when the wild man takes you to the water of life, you better be careful. You better be careful. Because amazing things will happen there. The boy would need to take care. That guy would need to take care. And it wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be easy. "I'll return each evening to see if you've obeyed my order," the wild man said. And off he went into the woods, leaving the boy by that spring. Well, the boy sat down at the spring, at the spring's edge, and occasionally he'd glimpse in that water a golden fish or a golden snake. And he took care to let nothing fall in. But do you remember that finger? Do you remember the finger that got pinched when he unlocked the cage? The one that bled? Well, that finger still hurt. It was throbbing. And as the day wore on, it throbbed more and more, and he was shaking it and shaking it. And all he wanted to do more than anything was just dip that finger into that cool water for just a second. And you know what? The boy forgot for just a second what the wild man had told him, and he dipped that finger into the water. Ooh. And he pulled it out, and instantly that finger had turned to gold. The finger turned to gold.
You know, Joe, if we're gonna live ourselves into the story, not just observe it, we have to ask ourselves, what wound do we carry that hurts so bad that we would need to cool it in that pond?
Yeah. And brothers, do you know a wound in your life that has turned to gold? Oh. He didn't expect that. He was still a boy. You can do it. Yes. Like many of us have had to do. He stood the rest of the day looking at that golden finger. He couldn't take his eyes off it. But as the sun began to set, he remembered that the wild man was returning. And he remembered what the wild man had said. Don't let anything touch this water. Nothing can spoil the spring. He saw the wild man coming, and what did he do? He put that finger behind his back.
They hid.
He thought he'd get away with it, right? He put that finger behind his back. It was a beautiful finger. And when the wild man came up, he said, "How was your day, boy?" "Oh, it was okay," he said. "Nothing happened today."
It's business as usual.
Business as usual. Just sitting here by the spring. "How was your day, wild man?" It was as if that wild man could see right through his chest. You put your finger in the spring. And slowly the boy pulled his finger out from behind his back. "Yeah, you can do it, boy." But in that moment he thought he couldn't. He was shamed and afraid. But you know what? That wild man had compassion on that boy. Yeah. The wild man had compassion and said, "We can let it pass this once. But it can't happen again." And the sun set, and the boy went to sleep again on the soft moss on the ground. And the wild man and the spring and all the forest settled into the darkness of the night. Now I need to remind you again that a day and a night in this story is not like a day and a night for us. It could have been 3, 5, 10 years. The boy is growing up. Yeah, he is growing up.
He might be 20 by now.
He might be 20 by now. Yeah. But early the next morning, he sat up again by that spring, watching over it while the wild man went off into the woods. He'd been warned once more not to let anything touch the water and wrong the spring. The boy was sure he could mind that request this time. He'd learned his lesson, right? Right? Let's see.
Yeah.
As the day wore on, his finger still throbbed, even though it had turned to gold. And it wasn't long before he ran his hand through his hair just like this. And without even knowing it, a single strand came loose, and the wind caught it. Can you see it just floating in the wind? Unbeknownst to the boy. By the time he saw it, it was too late, and it dropped right into the pond. With his golden finger, as quick as he could, he flicked it out onto the side of the pond, and there it was, as gold as could be. And he picked it up, and he held it in his hands, and he spent the rest of the day mesmerized by one single hair that had turned to gold. As night began to fall, fear again fell over him, because he knew once more that he had failed at his task. The wild man came back, and he knew what had happened. It was no use for him trying to hide it. "You've let a hair fall into the spring," the wild man said. Graciously, the wild man again had compassion on the boy, saying, "I'll allow it this time, but if it happens a third time." Why is it that everything happens 3 times in this story?
There's something to that.
Yeah, 3 strikes.
The boy.
For the 3rd time. So he said, "If it happens again, you will not be able to stay with me any longer." Now that was something new.
Yeah.
The boy knew that that was something significant. And so he made up his mind all the more to not let it happen again. Night fell, and he must have dreamed of seeing his face in that water, because the next day he couldn't resist looking more closely at his own reflection. He was determined, no matter how much his finger still hurt, not to let anything fall in that pond. But as time passed, he began gazing at the reflection of his own face over and over. Brothers, can you imagine what it would look like to see your own reflection in a golden fish or a golden snake? How beautiful that had to be.
A glimpse of his true self, maybe.
Yeah. His true self in that water. It drew him in more and more. And at one point, he got the desire to look straight into his own face. And so he put his face right over the spring. And in doing that, he leaned over so far that all at once, all of his hair just dropped over his head and into the spring. And just like that, he flew it out. He flung it back, and his entire head of hair had turned to gold. It shone like the sun above. It was beautiful.
It's going to be hard to hide.
It's going to be very hard to hide, but I think he'll find a way. He thinks he'll find a way. Jim, do you know what it's like to wake up and put your hair over the sink and then have to flick it back? And yeah,
There's some
you've been
things
there.
I know that you can only dream about.
Maybe someday. Well, now the boy was really frightened. He frantically looked for something to cover his head because he had to protect himself from the wild man. It was his 3rd time of failing at this task. And so he found an old bandana and he wrapped his head as best he could. He got every hair he could find and tucked it up under that bandana. He covered his head so much that it was completely hidden, that golden hair. But it wasn't long before the wild man arrived home, and of course he knew immediately. I mean, he had this big bandana on his head, right?
That's new. That's new.
That's
Something
new.
seems different about you. I can't place it.
Something seems different. "Take that rag off your head," the wild man said. Sheepishly, the boy removed the bandana, and his golden hair tumbled down over his shoulders. It was beautiful. The boy was silent. He knew that he'd failed the test. He'd been humbled by the trial and his inability to follow through on the wild man's request. 3 times he touched that spring. And now he knew what that meant. You can't stay here any longer. You can't stay here any longer, the wild man said. I told you, if you let it happen 3 times, you couldn't stay here. You didn't make it through the trial, and you must leave these woods, he said. And you must learn what poverty is.
Yeah. There's always more to learn, isn't there?
And always the day to leave the garden.
Yeah.
That's right.
We don't go willingly.
No. But we know that failure always teaches us more. And he was learning that himself, brothers, firsthand. he would leave the forest and be taught by poverty and the harshness of the real world. But before he left, the wild man blessed him on his way. The wild man gave him a blessing, not a curse. I see no evil in your heart. However, I wish you well, so I'll give you this gift, the wild man said. Whenever you are in trouble, come to the edge of the forest and shout, Iron John 3 times, and I'll come to the edge and I'll help you. My power is great, the wild man said, greater than anything you believe. And I have gold and silver in abundance. So, brothers, the next time you hear that the boy has gone to the forest to ask for help for Iron John, I want to invite you to stand right now, to stand up, and we're going to turn to the forest, to the mountain, to the river, and we're going to raise our hands, and 3 times we're going to say, Iron John, Iron John, Iron John, I have need of thee. Let's try it one more time. So when you hear the line, listen for the entire line, then say, Iron John 3 times, I have need of thee. Here's your cue. When he comes to the forest edge, he calls 3 times Iron John so loud that it echoed through the trees. Iron John, Iron John, Iron John, I have need of thee. You may be seated, brothers.
What do you think they thought at the front desk?
They're coming to help us, I think. And then, brothers, he heard the voice of Iron John.
The mountain birthed me and will claim me again one day. I want only to wander this earth, come what may.
Brothers, before we go on in the story, I just want to say one thing, that it's important to note here that accepting an initiatory task is far more important than whether you succeed or you fail at that task.
Yeah.
The boy, even though you can do it 3 times, touched that spring, he still made an effort. He still accepted the task. Let's see where that takes him next.
Yeah.
Oh.
You know, you can spend a lifetime mourning a wound like that.
Yeah.
Or
you can get on with it.
And staying in the garden, that might have been the failure anyway. Who's to say he didn't succeed?
Yeah.
Well, let's get back to the story, see what happens. So the king's son. Got you there.
Iron John. No.
He leaves the forest and he walks by beaten and unbeaten paths over busy roads less traveled, into places where there's no road at all, ever onward into the darkness. Now this was a very long walk. So I'd like you to stand up with me, brothers. And we're going to take a few turns clockwise as the great hand of time turns. And so spin around with me one time as 3 years pass by. And he kept walking and walking until at last he reaches a great city. And there he looks for work. So let's take another turn, brothers, as 5 more years pass by with the turnings of the hands of the clock. And despite his wanderings, he can't find any work. He has nothing to offer in terms of a skill. And so he set out again. Let's take one more turn. 10 years pass by and we're all dizzy. Maybe it was 12 years. Who can say? You can be seated. And eventually, he arrives at the palace. And they show him into the kitchen for his first job. Down in the basement of the palace, deep in the belly of the castle, in the basement of the basement, where he's given the task of carrying water and wood stoking the fires for the great ovens of the kitchen, raking the cinders, sweeping the cinders together. And now we find ourselves right here at the bottom of every great story. You know, it takes some time. It takes some living, a few years before we have enough ego so we finally have something substantial enough that it can burn to the ground. Yeah. So we can see the ashes on the floor, years of chopping wood, stoking the fire. And then and only then we can begin this cinder work that is at the heart of every initiation. Working the program, making the meetings, doing the grief work. So he sweeps the cinders until he's absorbed the charcoal into every pore under his fingernails, through his hair. He works the cinders till eventually he can taste the ashes of his life with no more fear. Wow. Yeah, the pungency's gone. Maybe he'll be grateful even for this one day. Yeah. Who knows? Well, one time it happened that no one's around, so the cook gives him the job to take some food up to the king. But the boy, well, he didn't want his golden hair to be seen, and so he put his tarbouche on. What the hell is a tarbouche?
I don't know what a tarbouche is. Anybody got a tarbouche?
If you give me some, I'll drink it.
Yeah.
There you go.
I know some people who would probably have one.
Yeah. Steve Gamble probably.
Steve Gamble would have.
Stephen Gamble.
Jonathan Miller would have a tarbouche.
Yeah. Stephen Gamble.
So this was improper for him to keep his hat on in front of the king. And the king says, "You take your hat off, boy." And he says, "No." Little shit.
You don't say no to the king.
King asks him again. He says, no. King asks him a third time. Of course. Yes. Of course. And the guy says, "Well, it's pussy.
The guy.
It's oozing." Yeah, the boy. Okay.
You can do
it. He says, "It's oozing all over the sore on my head." And the king is like, "Get this kid's ass out of my castle." Mm-hmm. So he pulls the cook up to the kid carpet, calls him on the carpet, says, "What the hell are you thinking?" And he says, "Get him out." But the cook was wiser than the king. And he knew the time had come, though, for a change of scenery. So he sends him to work in the garden. The garden, yeah. Puts him on this small plot of solitude, protected by these high stone walls. It's a refuge, it's a sanctuary place where the boy could open his arms to the heavens, and be swept by the wind, kissed by the rain, suckled by the bosom of the earth. And he felt his body awaken, respond, become aroused to the life that is throbbing in the garden. After this winter of working the fires, this is true. Sweeping the cinders, we're ready for a season of fruitfulness, beauty. Now, the boy's job.
You can do it, boy.
His job, he can do it. Cheer him on right now, brothers. It's to plant seeds in the garden, to water them, to chop the weeds with hoe and spade. And in the moonlight, he put his seed into the earth. Uh-oh. He reads poetry to the seeds, bidding them come. And the warm spring wains came, and the earth was made wet. The seed germinated. Early green shoots sprouted, and it was good. And he took the soft, sweet clover, and he caressed it. And he smelled it, and he tasted it. And he was ready to plant some more seeds. Woo!
Dad, what's gotten into you, man?
This isn't in my story.
This is
not in mine either.
My wife helped me do this part, so.
Right,
This is my family's version. Yeah. My wife is a sex therapist, in case you didn't know. So this is just normal dinner table conversation at the Avenroth house. So what can I say?
Wow.
So once in the summer, while he was in the garden by himself, with no one watching, no one around, well, it got so hot, he took his head covering off so that the breeze would cool his head. And he started to work up a sweat working, and so he pulled off his shirt. And I'm warming up, just reading it. When the sun touched his head, his hair glowed and blazed out so brightly that beams of sunlight went all the way up to the bedroom into the inner chamber of the king's daughter.
Uh-oh.
Here we go.
Yeah. Danger will rise.
And it says, while she's reclining on her bed, she leapt off her bed to see what she could see. And she spied the boy down below. And she said, oh my.
Oh my.
Probably a few other things too. And then she called down to him and she said, I see you.
I see you.
And the boy turned and he saw the maiden fair, the bonny lass, and her bosom up above.
Oh.
And he said, I see you.
Yeah.
Let's get it on, baby.
I know this isn't in my story.
It's not.
Robert Bly was a genius.
This did not come up in rehearsal at all.
At all.
So we need some help here, brothers. From this time, anytime you hear the king's daughter, the voice of the lover in the story, the voice of the lover, not necessarily the feminine, but just the voice of the lover. I want all of the men who are 50 and older, which is probably like 95% of this room.
It's a few of us.
I didn't say that was a bad thing at all, but
Yeah.
look, they just jumped to assumptions here. Those 50 and older are going to call out to, in the voice of the lover, I see you.
I see you.
And all of the younger men who are my age, 49 and younger, we're going to reply from the voice of the beloved, the young man, I see you. All right?
I see.
So let's try that. The king's daughter.
I see you.
I see you. That's pretty good.
All
We
right.
can make it more sultry, though, okay?
All right.
You know, God blesses our eroticism, right?
What? I think he thought it up, actually.
Yeah. It all belongs. And our eroticism extends so far beyond our sexuality between two people, right? Yeah.
That's right.
So she says, young man, bring me a batch of flowers. Whew. And he quickly put his tarboosh back on and he picked some wild flowers for the king's daughter.
I see you.
I see you. And he started up the steps with the wild flowers. And the gardener met him and said, what are you doing bringing the young lady such ordinary flowers? Get moving, pick another bouquet, the best we have, the most beautiful. What are you doing? Don't you know anything? And the boy says, no. You can do it. Yeah. He says, the wild flowers have stronger fragrance, and they will bring her more pleasure.
He's been with the wild man.
Yeah. That intoxicating aroma. And when the boy walked into the room of the king's daughter,
I see you.
I see you. She said, uncover your head. It isn't proper for you to cover your head in my presence. Whew. And he replied, nope.
Ain't gonna do it.
Wow.
She, however, grabbed his tarboosh with both hands and yanked it off. She's taking his clothes off here, right?
What's a tarboosh again?
Yeah, well, what part is this, right? And his golden hair tumbled down around his shoulders, and it was magnificent to look at. I bet it was.
Yeah.
Huh? And what do you think happened next? Let's get it. Yeah. Well, if he was a young man of 19 or 20, no doubt what would have happened next, right? Yeah.
Can't think straight.
Yeah. And it would have all been over. The entire future of what might happen, the potential moments to come, it all would have been over in 5 minutes. Yeah.
Well, let's be honest. 60 seconds.
60 seconds.
And it would have been back into the kitchen of another castle, a different road. 5 years of work might need to be relived for this young man. Maybe in his story, this is the third castle he's already been at in this situation. And that might be why he had the wisdom to say no. Or not yet. Yeah. And not, I think it has something about him being through the ashes. He's been initiated. And that childish play, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not about right or wrong. But that old way, it just no longer holds any interest to him. When I was a boy, I thought as a boy. Now I'm a man. I live as a man. Like a man. And he knows that when she looks at him, the king's daughter, I see you. I see you. Yeah. When she looks at him, she doesn't see him. She sees a gardener, which is part of the story, but it's not a prince, not a future king. She doesn't see someone who's worked the ashes even.
He's good looking.
He's good looking. All right, we got to get moving. So, the story says he runs out the door at a run, but she grabs him by the arm and gives him a handful of gold coins, and he takes them, and he left. But he put no stock in them. In fact, he brought the coins to the gardener and said, I'm leaving these to your children so they can use them to play with. Which is another sign, I think, he's an initiated man, right?
Yeah.
The world's values no longer apply to him.
Can't be bought.
That's right.
And the next day, the king's daughter again calls the young man to her. I see you. And told him, bring me some more wild flowers. And does he go? Yeah, hell yeah, he's
baby.
going back. Are you kidding?
3 times, right?
He's into arousal. He loves to play.
At least.
Yeah. He just isn't going to settle for anything less than everything his heart wants, right? So he goes back and he walks in and she reaches out for that little hat again. And he would have torn it away, but he grabs it with both hands. He's like, no. And once more, she gives him a handful of gold coins, but he refuses to keep them this time again and gave them to the gardener as playthings. And the third day, much the same happened, only this time he refused the money.
Well, now, is that
What's next?
my turn?
Yeah.
So we continue with the story, brothers. Do you remember that boy?
You can do it.
The boy
You can do
with
it.
the golden hair.
Yeah.
The story says, not long after, so this is another time, the country was swept up in war. The king gathered all his forces, knights in armor and shield and horses, war horses. And yet he was not positive that he could succeed against this enemy who was powerful and retained a large army. The gardener's boy said, I'm quite grown now, and I will go to war if you will just give me a horse, he told the other soldiers. The other men just laughed at him. A gardener, get real. Yeah, well, they said, they jeered it, and kind of elbowed each other. We got a horse for you. Now, you just wait until we're gone. And when we ride out of the city, then you can go into the barn. We'll have a horse waiting for you. But make sure you wait until we've gone. Oh, yeah. So when all the soldiers had left, the boy, he did that. He went to the barn. And you know what he wanted? One of those broad-shouldered horses, a horse of power with steam coming off his back, coming out of his nostrils. That's what they seemed to promise to him. And he gets in there in the dark and in that stable, and he does find a horse, but it's lame in one leg and walk hippity, hippity, hoppity. Well, you know what that boy did?
He can do it.
He climbed on it and he rode to the dark forest.
Here we
Way
go.
out
Here we
there
go.
on the edge
He knew what to do.
of the kingdom. And we can't, it's not tame anymore, by the way, brothers. They ripped up that concrete and got rid of that McDonald's. He came to the edge of that forest and he called 3 times for Iron John, so loud that it echoed off the trees.
Iron John! Iron John! I have need of thee!
Well, you or I, no, probably you guys, would have probably got on that horse, that 3-legged horse, that lame horse, and rode off on it because we might have thought that's all we deserved. But not this young man. Everyone else got a great horse but you. No, he wasn't thinking like that. He remembered what he was told by the wild man, simple words, simple and terrible words, words which one took to the very bottom of one's being. Iron John, Iron John.
Upon the steep mountain slopes, where I glide light-footed, or deep in the forest, among the animals who nuzzle to me and point their snouts toward water and bedding.
Well, he called 3 times just like he was told to, brothers. And in an instant, like a flash of lightning, the wild man arrived and said, "What is it that you want?" "I want a strong, great horse because I intend to go to war." "You will receive that and more than you have asked for as well." The wild man turned and went back into the woods. And not long afterwards, a stable boy came out of the trees leading a war horse that blew hot air through its nostrils and was not easy to hold in. The horse's eyes were 1,000 years old, its hooves 10,000. On the back of the horse's flank, there was something like cave paintings that flashed heroes, great heroes of the past and the future. They moved in the light. It was wondrous. It was a wondrous horse. So much so that everyone who saw it remained a little jealous until the end of their days. It was some kind of horse. And the boy turned over his 3-legged nag to that stable boy, and he mounted this new horse. And he rode out at the head of the soldiers, running with them, moving ahead. All this large band of warriors surrounded him, iron armor, fully ready for battle. And they all went to war. They galloped toward the enemy like a hurricane, and they struck down everyone that opposed him. The enemy turned to flee, but the boy kept after them and pursued them to the last man. So, brothers, we're going to ask you to rise and imagine that you are wielding a sword. You are one knight that is ready to fight for the common good. Maybe you're one of the 3 musketeers or Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride.
Yes,
I love that
you
guy.
killed my father.
I love that guy. You know something, I'm fighting left-handed.
Yes.
And we're going to run and dance. You know, you don't give a sword to a man who can't dance. That's the first rule. And you're going to move in a clockwise circle, brothers. You're running into battle. And some of you might feel like you are the enemy. And you might want to run counterclockwise. Some of you might be, I'm going to run that way.
Yeah.
Some of you might be the war horse. So brothers, we're going to stand.
Let's do it.
And we're going to do it. Don't forget your sword. That's pathetic.
Move, brothers, and dance. Wield your sword.
Brothers, find your seat again. Thank you.
You know, they started out
right.
kind of weak, but
They got into it.
yeah, I think they made it.
That was a nice war dance.
That looked pretty good.
War is hard.
Yes. Man can break a sweat.
So, the boy.
You can do it. I think they woke up.
Yeah, they pursued the enemy to the last man. And then, you know what this boy did? Instead of going back to the king on his beautiful, envious war horse, you know what he did? He went the back way, around to the edge of that forest, and he took the horse back to Iron John.
It was a rental, yes.
So, you know what? They didn't get the Iron John too good, did they? So, brothers, if we say Iron John, you're supposed to stand up and say, Iron John, Iron John, Iron John, we have need of thee. So, y'all ready? Iron John?
Iron John!
Iron John! Iron John! Iron John! We have need of thee! All right, you're catching on.
Follow me to hear how I speak to trees, and behold me fall to my knees at every fresh flowing spring.
What do you want? The wild man asked. The boy said, you can take your horse and your men back, and I'll take the three-legged horse. So it all happened as he requested, and he rode the hippity-hop back home. When the king returned to his castle, his daughter went straight to him and congratulated him on his victory. It wasn't me, the king said. There was this strange knight and his warrior band who arrived at the last minute, and he changed the whole course of the battle. The daughter was interested. Well, who was this?
Yeah, which daughter was this?
The princess. She said, who was this strange knight? But the king didn't know. He galloped off in pursuit of the enemy, he said, and that's the last I saw of him. Well, the girl seemed to put two and two together and went to the gardener and inquired about his boy. And the gardener laughed and said, well, you know, he's just coming back home on this three-legged nag. pretty funny looking. The farm help was making fun of him out there, shouting, "Guess who's here, Moopy Goop?" And then they said, "Where have you been, under a lilac bush somewhere? How was it?" And he said back to them, "Hey, listen, I was in war, and I fought very well, and if I hadn't been there, who knows how the battle would have gone." And they all fell all over themselves laughing.
And the story goes on, brothers. The king said to his daughter, "I'll arrange a great festival that will last 3 days." There's that number again. 3 days. It'll last 3 days, and maybe when it's all over, you'll be the one to throw out the golden apple. So the word went out in all directions, east, west, north, and south, that there was going to be a great festival until it reached every corner of the kingdom, and all in the land knew what was about to take place. Of course, the word reached the young man almost right away. And without delay, he rode out to the forest edge, and he called again for Iron John.
Iron John! Iron John! Iron John! I have need of thee!
Sit with me by firelight and hear my strange myths and riddling verses that spin you every which way.
Hearing the boy's request, Iron John appeared instantly. "There is going to be a great festival in the king's court, and I need to be there," said the young man. "I want to catch the golden apple, and the king's daughter is going to throw it." "No problem," said the rusty man. "It's as good as in your hands," Iron John told him. "And that's not all," he said. "I'm going to provide you with more red armor for the occasion and a powerful chestnut horse." Now, you might wonder, why red? Why chestnut? Well, no one knows for sure. But perhaps, brothers, it harkens back to the blood of his wound, or the blood of his birth, or the red clay from the earth that sustained him during the early days in the forest by that spring. Or perhaps it symbolizes the fierceness that he now embodies. Regardless, the Scarlet Knight galloped away from the forest and back into the heart of the kingdom. Stealthily, he rode among the other knights into the courtyard. No one recognized him. Just then, the king's daughter,
I see you. I see you.
She stepped forward. And with the golden apple in her hand, she threw it into the group of men. Oh, that's your cue. Yes, she threw it in. It was just one apple. Wow. Okay, brothers. And as you might have guessed, all the knights jostled with each other for position in an effort to catch the golden apple. But the young man was not to be denied, brothers. He slipped through the crowd undeterred, and he fetched the golden apple right out of the sky, just as Iron John said it would be. And as quick as he caught it, he galloped off and was gone. It was an amazing sight. The crowd, and especially the king, was stunned. Who was the Scarlet Knight? Everyone wanted to know. Of course, all would have to wait another day to find out. And so the next day, which could have been a very long time, even years, the young man went again to the edge of the forest, and he called for Iron John. Iron John! Iron John! Iron John! I have need of thee!
I knew it would become like this one day. Brutal storms and ferocious wildfires, and a sense you'd lost your way.
This time the wild one had him outfitted with white armor, and provided for him a horse as white as snow. He was noble and royal as he returned to the festival, white being a symbol of his strength. He a picture of pure masculine energy. Again, the king's daughter, I see you.
I see you.
She stepped forward and she threw the golden apple into the waiting crowd of men.
Oh, no.
Oh my gosh.
Or under siege.
Yes, here it goes.
They figured that out, didn't they?
Whose idea was this?
Almost magically, that one golden apple fell once more into the hands of the young man. Where are you, young man?
He caught the apple.
He caught the apple. Again, brothers, he did not pause for an instant. And suddenly all the apples stopped flying through the air. And they settled on the ground. And people began to pick them up and eat them. Brothers, it landed right again in his hand. Can you believe it? Luck was on this young man's side. And he didn't pause an instant again. He just galloped off. And of course, that made the king angry. And the king said, this behavior is not allowed. He can't do that. He's supposed to ride over to me and report his name. And he told his men, he said, if he catches that apple a third time, and if he gallops off again a third time, then I want you to chase him down. What's more, if he refuses to return, I want you to give him a blow. Use your sword and cut him. Again, brothers, it seems that the young man would be wounded. Yeah.
Growing up is risky.
Yes, it's risky business.
There's no way through.
Can't avoid the wounds.
That's right. And so the next day, the young man again went to the forest edge and he called for Iron John.
Iron John! Iron John! Iron John! I have need of thee!
When the walls of your world begin to crumble, come into the forest and clasp hands with me, and we will kneel down together and scratch the marks of a new plan into the dirt.
Yeah. Oh, may it be so.
This time the wild one gave the young man black armor and a black stallion. Need I tell you why? Well, actually, I don't know. You know?
I don't know yet.
But perhaps it was a sign that he, a man of notable gifts, had finally embraced his shadow. Perhaps it was a sign that he was about to die, brothers. That he knew it was about time to end something so that something new could be born in his life and of him. And so, brothers, he rode from the forest in a flash back to the festival. In came the dark night, and again the king's daughter. I see you.
I see you.
She stepped forward, and a third time, you know what she did? I almost hate to utter the word.
Oh, shit.
She threw that apple into the crowd. Oh, my goodness. Again, brothers, it landed right in his hands. It was just one apple. He could only catch one apple. That's all that was needed. And so all the other apples were not thrown in the air any longer. And all the king's men listened so carefully. But the king knew that things were out of hand. Because again, the young man rode off the instant he caught it. He rode away, and with him, the king's men galloped after. The chase was on, brothers. The young man seemed always a pace ahead, but the king's men persisted, the command of the king ringing in their ears. Cut him down if he runs away a third time. Finally, one man got close enough to swing his sword and to nick the leg of the fearless knight. Well, when the young man was struck, his black horse reared up on his hind legs in just a way to protect the boy from a fatal wound. And as he did, the young man's helmet fell to the ground, brothers, and everyone could see his golden hair. Ah, that golden hair. The king's men rode home, and they told the king everything that had happened. Brothers, I just want to point out that he had to have a late-stage initiatory wound. This wound meant something. It was significant. It was a wound in the late stage of his life that was provided by older men. And it was a simple laming. It was done to strengthen the young man, to cut to his core and open in him just a wound. Not just a wound, but a womb, brothers. A generative place of life. He becomes double-hearted with this wound. Now he has a physical heart, as he has always had, but he also, brothers, has a compassionate heart. He's able to feel for others, to suffer with the world around him. That's huge. That is huge.
So if you're too careful, too contrived, you might miss the wound.
Yeah.
If you don't go and fight for the apple.
That's right. And you might miss the womb of the wound. The place of suffering and feeling. A place that opens you up to see the needs around you and to live your life for something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
This was no longer a boy.
Not a little boy.
No. Yeah.
You did it.
Yeah.
Well, let's see him do it.
Yeah.
So,
Bring us
the
home,
young
man.
woman who was a child of the Royal Highness.
Nice.
The next day inquired the gardener about his helper. He's back at work in the garden, said the gardener. The strange young one went to the festival yesterday and only got back last night. And did you know he showed my children 3 golden apples he had won? And like that, the cat out of the bag. And she told her father. Of course she did. So the king calls the young man into the chambers, and he was wearing, I'm sure, his tarbouche. And when he appeared with it, and the king saw it, he said, "Hey, you are the son of a bitch that wore that last time in my court and spoke right back to me to my face. You got about a big set of balls coming in here like that again." But there was some admiration in the voice this time. And the king's daughter went up to him. I see you. And I think she does see him now. Yeah.
Not just
She
the
does
gardener.
see him. She went up and she pulled the tarbouche off, and the golden hair flowed all the way down to the ground. And his beauty was so great that everyone was astounded.
Yeah.
That must have been something. How beautiful you think that might have been?
Sunrise, sunset.
Yeah. Sandia Mountain in the distance.
It was that good. The king said, "Are you the knight who appeared each day at the festival with a different color horse, and each day caught the one golden apple that was thrown?" "I am," he said. "And the golden apples are here." And taking the apples from his pocket, he handed them to the king. "If you need any more evidence, you can look at the wound. The wound that your men gave me when they were chasing me. What's more, I'm also the knight that helped defeat the enemy." "Well, my, said the king. "If you can perform feats like that, you are much more than a gardener's boy." The story's not over yet. He says, "Who are your parents?" Which is a great question, isn't it? Who are your parents? Brothers, who are your parents? Because this story is about us. And I don't know if we can always handle the truth that comes right here. Who are our parents? Are we ready? My mother is a notable queen, the wisest in the land. My father, a noble king, and I have a great deal of wealth. Wealth beyond the material, more than I will ever need. The king said, it's clear that I owe you a debt of gratitude, and whatever I have in my power that would please you, I freely give it. Well, the young man said, I do have something in mind.
He'd been thinking about it.
What a surprise. But it is not in your power to grant. But if it be to her liking, and she grants her full and conscious consent. This is the 21st century here. We are cleaning up these stories here. Without regard to the patriarchal and elitist tradition of arranged political marriage between royal families. Yes. Wow. None of that. If it be so, he says, then I shall take your daughter's hand and all the rest of her as well.
Whoa. What did she say?
You can do it.
And she laughed and she said, I like the way you don't beat around the bush. Yeah. I already knew you weren't just a gardener from the first time I laid eyes on that golden hair. Yeah. And she walks over and she kisses him. And the king rose from his throne and proclaimed a season of feasting and dancing and rest from work, a season of making love and music and poetry. And the young man's father and mother, how about that? They were among the ones invited to the wedding. They never did see their boy again, though, did they?
No, they didn't.
They never saw their boy.
That boy disappeared.
They did see an amazing young man.
Yes. Yes.
And they were in great joy because they never thought they'd see either. Mm-hmm. While all the guests were sitting at the table for the marriage feast, the music broke off all at once. And the great doors swung open. And a baronial king entered, accompanied in procession by many attendants in all their finery, their accoutrements. And he walked up to the young groom and embraced him, and the guest said, I am Iron John.
Whoa.
Who, through an enchantment, not a curse, through an enchantment, became turned into a wild man for a season. And you have freed me from that enchantment. And all the treasure that I own will from now on belong to you, for you have appropriated it well.
And that might be the end of the story, brothers. Or perhaps just the beginning. Because there's one more detail that you need to know. At that wedding, there in the rafters was a magic bird who heard every word and saw everything that happened between this boy, between this king's daughter,
I see you, I see you,
and between Iron John. And he saw everything. And he collected that whole story within his beak, and it went down and rested in his breast. And brothers, this magic bird flew across the oceans and across the centuries, and he landed in a little town in a place called Minnesota. And he came to the window of this poet, this man who is a great artist. And he opened his mouth and he began to sing the story. And this man heard this story. And he turned it into a book that affected a generation of men. A generation of men who have affected many of us in this room. And we, brothers, have spoken this word, have whispered this story again to you. And once more, the question becomes, what will you do with it?
What will you do with it?
What will you do with it?
And that is all we know. Ho! Ho!